Time flies, and we have a new release of Home Assistant in our hands. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, sit down, and we'll see what's new in Home Assistant 2022.10. We'll start in a couple of seconds. Tradition says that after a major release such as the 2022.9 was, we have the next release that doesn't have that much of a new functionality, but instead has more of a focus to stabilize things that were brought in the previous release. But in my opinion, this release is also feature-packed. So let's look at the couple of new items that I have selected for you that I think are great in this new release. We'll start with the new integrations and the integrations that can now be added via the UI. As for the new integrations, we have Google Sheets, which we will look closely in just a moment. iBeacon Tracker, which we will be looking at closely in a couple of more moments. Kectron, Kmite Microbot Push, LIDAR, Niba Heat Pump, Nobo Echo Hub, SwitchB, and Tilt Hydrometer Bluetooth. As for the integrations that are now available through the UI, these are the DSMR Reader and the Radar, double R. Sonar, Radar, LiDAR are all components that allow you to integrate your current existing multimedia library. Of course, if you know what sonar, radar or LiDAR are, then you know that it is really good to integrate them inside Home Assistant. Just be careful, there are also some breaking changes which I will not be covering in this video. And one of the breaking changes is in regard to radar. Of course, as always, before you install the new version of Home Assistant, always go through the list of the release notes, especially this section with the breaking changes. But let's look at the Google Sheets. This is the first thing I've mentioned as a new integration. Google Sheets integration allows you to integrate or connect your Google Drive to Home Assistant. With this integration, you will be able to create one and just only one Google Sheet that will be hosted on your Google Drive and then fill the information from within your Home Assistant to that Google Sheet. As the note says, the integration currently only has access to that one document that is creating during the setup. So no other documents that are on your Google Drive will be, at least currently, accessible via this Google integration. Also, unfortunately, this integration is not very easy to set up. If you are fortunate enough that you already have Google integration inside your Home Assistant, and I'm not talking here about the Google Chromecast, I'm talking about Google Assistant or something similar, the steps can be a little bit shorter. So let's go through those steps. The credentials that are used for this are the same ones for the Nest. If you already have those credentials set up, you can skip all the steps up to step 13. Let's expand the list. I myself will try and skip all the steps and make sure Publish Settings is set to production. Let me open this Google Developers Console. I will confirm that this is the project that I want to use. I will enable Google Drive API. On the left menu, go to API and Services and on the Credentials. Click on Create Credentials, OAuth Client ID. Application type has to be web application, and for the name we can use something like this, Home Assistant Credentials. Click on Add URE to authorize redirects UREs and paste the link from the documentation. The link is https my.homeassistant.io/redirect/OAuth. And the last step we have to do here is press Create. And here we have our client ID and client secret. I will also download this as a JSON because I may need them later on. We will need this client ID and client secret in our Home Assistant. If you by chance forget and didn't download the JSON file with the client ID and client secret, you can click on the link with the name Home Assistant Credentials, and here on the right side you will see them. But be careful and keep this data private. In Home Assistant, in the Integrations page, click on plus sign to add new integration. And here you will see something that's also new. Let's type Google. We see here just one Google item. But when we click on it, we see here the list of all the possible Google integration that Home Assistant knows to work with. We are looking for Google Sheets. And fill in the necessary data. Give it a name. I called this one Home Assistant Google Sheet. Copy your client ID and of course your client secret. If everything has been set up correctly, when we click on Add, we will be redirected to select our account. We will click on Continue, Continue, and we have to link our account. Be careful that this instance here is the instance that you want to use. And if everything has been set up correctly, you should see something like this. Successfully authenticated and the spreadsheet has been created, and this is the URL to that spreadsheet. Let's press Finish. From now on, you can use Google Sheets Append to Sheet service to add data to this sheet. You can also append data to other subsheets that are contained in the same document. The question is, of course, for what you can use this Google Sheet integration. It all depends on, of course, on your use cases. For me, I have currently one notification service that at midnight stores some data in regard to my electricity usage to a comma-separated file. I can convert this notification service and now import that data directly to the Google Sheets. And yes, of course, also create some graphs there, which is of course much easier than handling the CSV file that is located down on the file system of Home Assistant. If you are interested to see on how you can do more things with this integration, some automations and some examples, just drop me a line down below and we will be creating a separate video just for this Google Sheets integration. In order for you to find out if the Google Sheets API is active, click on the navigation menu, APIs and Services, and click on Enabled APIs. This is the list of all the APIs that have been enabled. You can click on Enable APIs and Services and type here Sheets. If the API is disabled, you can click on Enable button here. In my case, I have already enabled it. The next thing that we want to make sure is that the Google Drive API is also enabled. Let's go back. Type here Drive, Google Drive API, and also in my case, this Google API Drive has been enabled too. While we are already talking about the integrations. The integrations version 2.0 or integrations version 2, how it's called in this release Home Assistant, allows Home Assistant to bundle entities that fall into the same company name. We already shown the case of Google. If we type Google, we see that in the previous release of Home Assistant we had, in this case, 4 Google integrations. If we would type Denon, we see that we have Denon IVR network recorders and Denon Health. In this new release of Home Assistant developers have tried to bundle things that fall into the same company. That way it's easier for the users to find them. In the case of Google, that is one integration with all the other integrations under it nested. And same thing goes for the Denon. If we click it, we see the integrations that exist for the Denon devices or services. One additional awesome thing in this new release of Home Assistant is automations. And this one is for all those that like automations in the YAML files, but are also considering to move them to the UI or to just verify how they would look if they were created inside the UI. And if you have automations in the YAML, you know the issue. You click on automation and receive notification that only automations in automations YAML file are editable. New release of Home Assistant brings something fresh. And this is the option to be able to edit and import or migrate to the UI automations. I here have one automation that has been created in the YAML file, and if we click on it, we can see the warning that this automation cannot be edited from the UI because it's not stored in the automations YAML file or doesn't have an ID. But now we have option to migrate it. The second thing that this allows us is to, besides migrate to the UI, we can see how the automation would look if it would be created in the UI. Triggers will show the triggers as configured via the YAML file. Conditions will show the conditions, and actions will show actions for this specific automation on how they would look inside the UI. If you decide that you want to migrate to UI, you just have to click on Migrate, read the warning because there are some extra steps, and click on OK. You then would need to save the automation, but you would also need to delete the YAML code for the previous or handmade automation, because you don't want to have two automations, one in the YAML and the other one inside the UI. I really wish that Jeff, Slacker Labs, would have known this, because this is much easier way of migrating automations from the YAML to UI than doing it via the hand. And one additional note. All of the configuration files for my main setup, this means my home setup, not the recording setup, are available on the GitHub. And the link to that is usually in the description of the video. There you may access all of the YAML files, which means all the automations, entities, ESP home data, etc. And you can use it, scrape it, change it, or import it in your own Home Assistant. Also on my GitHub repository, you have some other information, such as hardware I'm using, add-ons, integrations, folders and files, and of course, counters, which I misspelled. The counters is the list of how many of each of the integrations or entities inside Home Assistant I have. Currently around 30,000 lines of YAML code. And that is also the reason why I myself will not be importing the automations from the YAML file to the UI, because I want to share them with you. Whatever I create in my setup is for you to use. Last week I released video on the NS Panel Pro, and I followed the guide that was created by Blackadder and some other community members. For the purpose of recording that video, I have created this dashboard, which is called 4Panel. Because having mushroom cards and a specific display or dashboard just for this type of device really helps with navigating on that device. One thing that has been added in the 2022.10 version of Home Assistant is SubViews. And on my last stream, and by the way, I really do hope that you watch my streams. If not, don't forget to click the subscribe and bell button so you get notified when I start my streams. We have created this button here, and what it does, if we click on it, we see a sub-view or sub-dashboard behind that dashboard. The upper navigation bar has changed to allow us just to go back, and we don't see this sub-view in a standard navigation bar. So how do you add it and how do you use it? Click on three dots, Edit Dashboard, and you see here something called Subtest. This is that sub-view that we created on stream. Let's click on plus. Let's create a new sub-view, call it Subscribe View. This creates a URL that's called Subscribed View URL. If we tick the box next to Subview and click on Save, it will allow us to add elements to it. So we can add a couple of things. Let me quickly do that. We now have Subscribed View, which is a sub-view that has a couple of entities or couple of views. If we click on Done, we will not be seeing it if we navigate back. But how do you navigate to that sub-menu? Click on three dots, Edit Dashboard, Add Card, and let's create a button. Remove Entity, name it Subscribe View. Instead of Tap Action Toggle, select Navigate. In the navigation path, select Path to that new view we just created, Subscribe View, and click Save. If we press Done, and if we click it, it will take us to this sub-view. This can really help with the real estate of the screens, both on mobile devices, tablets, and of course the NS Panel Pro. And let's talk about two additional things that I need to mention because I think that they are awesome, and I'm really looking forward to finally being able to add active Bluetooth connections to my Home Assistant. But before we talk about the active Bluetooth connections via the proxies, let's talk about iBeacons. This is my main system, not recording setup, and I've just updated it to the beta 5 version. And by the way, this also tells you about the stability of beta versions because, yeah, I can even run them on my main setup. If we click on notifications and check out the new Discover devices, we see these new integrations. These three are new because so far I have been using a Bluetooth proxy, and the previous version of the Bluetooth proxy was using passive connection. But since I've activated the Bluetooth proxy active connections, I now can add even those devices that require active connections. But as I said, let's first talk about iBeacon Tracker. If you are using active connections and there are devices that can use iBeacon, you will see option to configure iBeacon Tracker. I myself will probably not be using it in my main setup, but let's press configure and see what devices we can see here. Do you want to set up, submit? And it has found two devices, Nuki Opener and Nuki. These two are Nuki devices and they use Bluetooth connections to talk to one another. Let's press on finish. At the time of the recording of this video, and this is the beta 5 version of Home Assistant, which should be released tomorrow, the iBeacon is still getting a lot of love and attention. There are some issues with it. For example, some of devices create a random numbers besides the MAC address. And it can create dozen or hundred or thousand of additional devices inside the iBeacon. Currently, there is one safety measure inside the iBeacon, and if it sees that the same device is creating multiple instances, it will stop doing it and delete the previously created instances. For me, the record was 167 devices added to iBeacon, which I think are just my neighbors' phones or something similar. As you can see, we already have a third device here. For each of devices, we have a couple of entities. One entity is it in the range or home or not? And the other one is estimated distance. There are additional two entities that show you the power and the signal strength that can help you pinpoint the devices. This estimated distance is more of a guesstimate or guess of the estimated distance than it really is. The device can be up to 1 centimeter close and still show it's 15 meters away, or vice versa. It can show that it is close by while actually it is not. For what this integration is great, it is great to see if the device is near, somewhere but not that far, or far. And that way you can use it inside your automations to see if person is moving away from home or approaching your home, and then activate some automations. For example, turn the heating off, turn the heating on, lights off, on, etc. But let's now talk about my favorite integration, and that is the active connections for the Bluetooth proxy. ESP Home Bluetooth proxies has been released in the previous release of Home Assistant, actually the ESP Home, not the Home Assistant. And it allows you to use the external devices such as the generic ESP32, the M5 stack, and this one that has the RJ45 connection. It also allows you to use some additional devices. If you click on Show Advanced Boards, you will see the LilGo one, GL iNet, wireless tag, etc. But for the purpose of this video, I will be once again using this M5 stack device because it's so thin and small and it works awesome. What the previous release allowed us, it allowed us to use this proxy to silently listen to the Bluetooth packages and then collect the data and import it inside Home Assistant. But if, for example, the Bluetooth devices that you had require active connection, such as my newly installed SwitchBot curtain robots, and they require the active connections to be able to start them, stop them, no, you couldn't do that with the passive connection. In this release of Home Assistant and the upcoming release of ESP Home, we have ability to use those active connections. The procedure to install active Bluetooth proxy on this device is the same. You select the device, press on Connect, select the port, click Connect, and then follow the procedure to install M5 Stack Atom Lite. Everything else is the same. It would then install it, ask you to select the SSID and input the credentials to the Wi-Fi, and then allow you to add it to Home Assistant if you want. And after you have enabled active connections in the ESP Home, you should see new devices, of course, if you have them. For me, this is the bot, which is the SwitchBot bot, the meter, which is the older version of the humidity and temperature meter, and this curtain sensor. Configure, submit, finish, configure, submit, finish, configure, submit, finish. All those devices are now available from within Home Assistant, and I can control the curtains, close them, open them, stop them, see the light level, battery status, has the calibration been done or not, etc. You may wonder what you need to do to add this to your existing YAML code inside the ESP Home. Remember, this has been just pulled today, on Tuesday, and the current release of ESP Home, which is 2022.9.2, still doesn't have that functionality inside. You have to have a later version than the 2022.9.2. If you want to add the active connections inside your ESP Home current devices, they need to be ESP32 or similar devices that have both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. You need to have ESP_BLE_tracker enabled. These are the recommended values: scan parameters, interval 1100 milliseconds, window 1100 milliseconds, active true, and also the Bluetooth_proxy with the active true. With this enabled and compiled and updated over the air or whatever way you are using to update your firmwares, you will be able to have the active connection between Home Assistant and the Bluetooth devices. I really do hope that you did enjoy your cup of coffee. And by the way, this mug and all the other merchandise can be found on my merch store. The link to it is down in the video description. While the devs say that this release is nothing special, I really think that this is once again an awesome release. And I'm looking forward to the next one already. I really would like to thank all the YouTube channel members that have been supporting me for a long time. Thank you all for all of your support. You've really been awesome. But let's not forget each and every one of you who has watched, liked or subscribed to my channel. If you too want to support the channel, you can do so by becoming a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button down below. And I'll be seeing you next time. Until then, bye bye and have fun.